I think one of the most unfortunate things that white supremacy has done is it's also created this insecurity in white people who aren't wealthy and who are not like hyper privileged, making them feel as though they've been given everything they need to have access to this wealth and have access to this life of success, and that they're failing simply by their own lack. When in reality, white supremacy isn't about ensuring that all white people are able to succeed and live a higher quality of life than everybody else. White supremacy is so deeply tied to classism and maintaining a hierarchy. And in that hierarchy, all white people cannot be at the top. What needs to happen in that hierarchy is that all of the people who are at the top mostly represent white people, in terms of most of the people at the top should be white. But it doesn't mean that the entire white race is going to get to be successful and rich and living their best lives. It just means that the wealthy and the powerful should be white. That's all white supremacy is doing. But white supremacy, I think, is really just an extension of classism. It's really just an extension of classism. And classism does not care about poor white people and does nothing to ensure that poor white people will be okay. And I was watching this documentary in Britain talking about how the self-esteem of young white boys and white men is steadily decreasing and like at an all-time low, and it's a crisis. And I can totally see that. I can totally understand that. And I think it's because we're not speaking properly about what a white supremacist world really is and who it actually benefits. You know, just the same way that we're now getting into a conversation about the fact that patriarchy does not actually work for men. It works for a certain sect of men, and it was always intended that way. And those men framed it as all men so that they could get men on their side. But it's not actually meant for men. It's meant for a certain group of powerful people. And white supremacy is the same way. And all of these white boys who are feeling insecure about where they are at in the world and feeling like they should have access to more, first of all, they've been deeply deprived of their own history, which is working class history. If they understood that history, they would know that white men who come from poor backgrounds have never been at the top of the stratosphere, have never been at the top of the ladder. They have been trying to climb and find ways to success different from other groups of people who had to deal with more intersections of oppression, but still at the bottom with the rest of us in terms of classism. If they understood that, they would know they're not failing by some personal measure because they're not able to succeed in a white supremacist world. A white supremacist world was not built for white people. A white supremacist world was built for extremely wealthy, extremely greedy, extremely powerful families. And the point was that most of them would be white at the top. And they were finding all of these ways to distinguish themselves and to create hierarchy. And one of the ways they did that was race. But it's also, it was also through gender. It was also through nationality. It was also through religion. They were finding all these identity markers. It wasn't just about being white. And it's just unfortunate because I think that one privilege, and maybe I find this a privilege. I don't know if every other person of color would find this a privilege. But I'm grateful to have grown up understanding my place in the world and knowing that it wasn't about me, it was about the system. And I think that that's something that unfortunately a lot of young white men and young white boys are not understanding and not hearing enough. It's not about you. It's not your wrongdoing. It's not your failure. It is the system, and you are a victim of the system just as the rest of us are. And you are not supposed to be succeeding because you're a white man, because you're not rich. If you were a rich, like extremely powerful, wealthy white man, born into a rich, wealthy family, I would say that maybe you should, maybe there's a higher chance of you being all right and you being successful naturally, like off top. But if not, like if you weren't born into wealth, no, there is no expectation that you are supposed to be doing incredibly well. That's not what we all expect. And you should not take that on as a personal failure because you're not doing well. It says nothing about you. It says nothing about the way that you're failing to utilize privilege. You don't have the privilege that you think that you have. Being white is not enough. Being a man is not enough. You need to also be wealthy. You need to also have this knowledge of the system passed down to you. Certain knowledge that none of us have because none of us are born into these powerful families. And what information is made available to us is the information they allow. You know, we can only know and understand as much as they allow to be put out into the world. There's not that many like snitches in their world, you know, getting the secrets out. There's not that many whistleblowers. So we know what we know, and everything else we're working in the dark. So, you know, that's just my little message of empathy towards white boys growing up right now and white men. It's like, and the message can also extend further out just to men in general. It's like, I can't speak for everyone, but I know I'm not expecting that you guys are supposed to be thriving because you're men or because you're white. That's not what this system produces. That's not what this system allows for. The system was not hoping that you would be successful at all. The same way it tried to stomp out your grandfathers and your fathers, it wants to do the same to you. It wants to make sure that the upper class remains small. And that does not include you and your poor family history. They don't want you in there. They'll accept you as white people, as men, as Christians, as whatever. But in terms of you getting to actually live a high quality standard of life and be successful, no, they're not betting on that. They're not rooting for you in that. And you do have barriers that you are going to face because you were not born extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, with access to these families, with access to this information, with access to land, with access to all these things. You know, like you do have things that are systemically oppressing you. And it's important that you recognize that, because if you don't, you're going to put too much on your shoulders and your self-esteem will highly be damaged by that. And it makes no sense to make yourself suffer in that way. So I think it's unfortunate knowing that a lot of men take that on and that a lot of white men are taking that on. And I think it's a benefit to all of us to make sure that this message spreads around, that it's not a personal failing. You're not a personal failure because you're not rich. You know, at least from my perspective, I acknowledge that it's a very complicated, nuanced, intersectional issue that we're dealing with in this world. And being white and being a man is not enough to mean that you should have everything you need to be successful. Not at all. So that's just my little message of empathy and I guess love and grace to you guys if you need it.